More than 2,000 years ago, the most powerful city on Earth vanished beneath the sea. And then, in 1996, a team of divers found something they weren't supposed to. Entire city blocks still intact. Massive stone columns, giant red granite temples, human statues standing upright on the ocean floor, with no record of who they were or how they got there. What you're about to hear isn't just about ruins. It's about how a city that rivaled Alexandria itself disappeared without warning, leaving behind mysteries that scientists still can't fully explain. So today we're going to dive deep, literally, into the sunken city of Alexandria, also known as Canopus. We'll unravel its temples, its rituals, its sudden collapse, and the theories that fight to explain it. And along the way, you'll see why this discovery might just rewrite what we thought we knew about Egypt's ancient past. The first time anyone even guessed something was hiding under the waters of Abu Qir Bay was back in 1933. An Egyptian scholar named Prince Omar Toussoun spotted unusual shapes off the coast from an airplane. Later dives confirmed fragments of stone walls and statues, but the technology of the time couldn't go much further. For decades, the city remained more rumor than reality. It wasn't until the 1990s that the mystery came roaring back. The European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, led by Frank Goddio, a former underwater archaeologist, began scanning the bay with sonar. By 1999, they had proof, an entire ancient city hidden just meters beneath the silt. And that's when the questions began, because history books tell us that this lost city, named Canopus, was once a thriving port town on the Canopic branch of the Nile Delta. Before Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC, Canopus was the place. Greek merchants, Egyptian priests, fishermen, nobles, all of them passed through here. But if it was so important, how did it vanish so completely that no one remembered where it was? Let's rewind to when Canopus was alive. Picture the 4th century BC. Egypt is in chaos. Native dynasties are collapsing, and foreign powers like the Persians keep invading. Then along comes Pharaoh Nectanebo I, one of the last native Egyptian kings. He commissions massive temples across the Nile Delta, including the naos of the decades that would one day be pulled from the waters of Abu Qir Bay. This shrine is one of the most unusual objects ever found in Egypt. It's covered with a star calendar, 36 groups of constellations, each ruling over 10-day periods, etched in painstaking detail. Ancient priests would have used it to measure time, predict floods, and plan rituals. When it was discovered underwater, broken into fragments, scholars pieced it back together and realized it was a masterpiece of astronomy and religion fused into stone. But Canopus wasn't just about temples. It was about water. Its entire identity was built on its position at the mouth of the Nile. Think of it as the last stop before the open Mediterranean. Goods from deep inside Africa could be shipped north down the river, stored in Canopus, and then traded across the known world. Greek amphorae, Egyptian grain, Nubian gold, incense from Arabia, all of it passed through here. With trade came religion. By the 3rd century BC, under the Ptolemies, the Greek dynasty that ruled after Alexander, Canopus exploded with cultural fusion. Egyptians worshipped Osiris and Isis, while the Greeks introduced Serapis, a god that merged Zeus, Hades, and Osiris into one. The head of Serapis, carved in marble and standing almost 60 centimeters tall, was pulled from the ruins of Canopus in 1999. It was once part of a statue over 4 meters high. Imagine swimming through murky water and seeing that face staring back at you. The city was also infamous. Roman writers like Juvenal described Canopus as a place of decadence, filled with banquets, drinking, and wild rituals. It was seen as both holy and corrupt, a city of gods in excess. And then, silence. So what happened? How did a city with docks, temples, statues, even aquaculture ponds for raising fish simply vanish? That's where things get messy. The simplest explanation is that the land gave way. The Nile Delta is built on layers of soft, compacting sediment. Over time, that sediment sinks. Add in rising sea levels, about 2 millimeters per year over the last 1,300 years, and you have a recipe for slow drowning. Geological studies show the ground around Canopus has sunk by 4 to 5 meters in the last 2,500 years. But that theory doesn't explain the evidence of sudden destruction. When divers recovered statues in 2025, including a quartz sphinx with the cartouche of Ramesses II and several granite and marble figures, many of them were headless. Limbs were snapped off clean. Archaeologists say that's more consistent with a violent collapse, like an earthquake or soil liquefaction, where the ground suddenly behaves like liquid and swallows everything above it. There are even historical accounts of tidal waves and earthquakes in the eastern Mediterranean that line up with the rough period of Canopus's disappearance. If a quake hit the delta, the sandy soil could have liquefied instantly, dragging temples and statues into the sea. Imagine an entire dockyard breaking apart in a single night. And yet, the story still doesn't fit neatly. Some structures seem to have sunk gradually, others look shattered in an instant. The consensus now is that both things happened. A long, slow sinking over centuries, punctuated by sudden disasters that toppled temples and left statues broken. But here's the problem. No one wrote it down. We have Greek and Roman texts praising Canopus, mocking its decadence, describing its rituals, but not a single surviving text describes its destruction. Think about that. A city large enough to rival Alexandria disappears, and not one historian says, "Oh, by the way, it sank." That silence is one of the greatest mysteries of all. The artifacts themselves raise even bigger questions. Take that quartz sphinx found in 2025. Quartz ranks a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Bronze tools, which were common at the time, rank less than 4. So how exactly were they carving detailed hieroglyphs into quartz with that technology? Egyptologists point to abrasives like sand or dolerite pounders, but no carving tools have ever been found at Canopus itself. Until we recover direct evidence, the precision of that carving feels like a gap in the story. Then there's the harbor. Divers mapped a 125-meter-long dock with evidence of a crane base, stone anchors, and even aquaculture ponds. Building that kind of infrastructure in the soft, marshy soils of the delta should have been nearly impossible without advanced stabilization methods. And yet, the dock is still aligned after more than 1,500 years underwater. No timber pilings, no foundation structures have ever been found. It's like the engineers of Canopus knew something we don't. And the strangest part? The statues themselves. Many are broken in eerily consistent ways, heads missing, torsos intact. Archaeologists expected random destruction, cracks, chips, scattered fragments. Instead, they found torsional fractures, as if the statues had been twisted or toppled deliberately. Was this the result of earthquakes, or something else entirely? That's where the mystery of Canopus starts to bleed into legend, because some have called it Egypt's Atlantis, a city punished by the gods for its decadence. Ancient writers hinted at divine wrath, though they never named Canopus directly, and while modern scholars dismiss that as myth, the absence of clear evidence leaves space for speculation. What we do know is that by the 8th century AD, Islamic texts describe the Canopic branch of the Nile as inundated. By then, Canopus was gone, buried under water and mud. For over 1,000 years, it slept. What makes this story even stranger is the timing of its rediscovery. First spotted in 1933, rediscovered in 1999, expanded in 2019, major new finds in 2025. Roughly every 20 to 25 years, the city gives up another secret. It feels almost intentional, and each discovery makes the puzzle harder to ignore. The Naos of the decades with its astronomical calendar, the head of Serapis, too large to be anything but a cult statue, the quartz sphinx of Ramesses II, impossibly carved, the granite and marble statues with clean breaks, the dock, the crane base, the fish ponds, the aquaculture systems. Put it all together, and you don't just get a city, you get a paradox. A city advanced enough to build monumental docks and temples in shifting delta soils, religious enough to carry Osiris on a barge through ceremonial canals, decadent enough to earn the scorn of Roman satirists, and fragile enough to vanish completely without leaving a single eyewitness account of its destruction. And that's just the beginning of the mystery. So let's zoom in on what life in Canopus would have actually looked like before everything went under. Imagine walking down a bustling dockside in the 3rd century BC. Ships from Greece are unloading amphorae filled with wine. Egyptian barges pull in heavy with grain. Priests in white linen robes march in processions, carrying sacred statues of Osiris through the streets toward the ceremonial canal. Fishermen are hauling in catches from aquaculture ponds, where water is carefully funneled from the Nile to raise fish for both food and ritual sacrifice. And towering above it all are the temples, enormous stone walls, some stretching over 100 meters, carved with reliefs of gods, both Egyptian and Greek. This was no provincial town. This was a place of trade, faith, and cultural fusion. But for all its sophistication, Canopus also carried a darker reputation. Roman writers like Seneca and Juvenal didn't mince words. To them, Canopus was a city of indulgence, parties that never ended, wine that flowed endlessly, religious rituals that blurred into excess. Some even claimed the city was a warning, a place where reverence for the gods was twisted into decadence. Whether that was true or just propaganda, we'll never know. But it adds another layer to the legend of why this city may have been punished. And then came the decline. Sometime in the late Ptolemaic or early Roman period, Canopus began to slip. Not all at once, but slowly, like a patient sliding into illness. Archaeologists have found evidence of gradual subsidence, the land literally compressing under its own weight, sinking into the delta. Over centuries, the city was lowered meter by meter, water creeping into its streets. But then something else happened. Divers today can see the scars, statues cracked in half, limbs sheared off, massive stone blocks tilted violently into the seabed. Those aren't the marks of slow drowning, they're the marks of catastrophe. And the prime suspect? Earthquakes. The Nile Delta sits on soft, waterlogged sediments. Shake it hard enough, and the ground can liquefy. Whole neighborhoods can collapse in minutes. Geological surveys of Abu Qir Bay show clear evidence of soil liquefaction in the layers where Canopus once stood. Combine that with reports of Mediterranean quakes around the 2nd century BC, and the theory gains weight. But here's where the story twists. Neither explanation works alone. If the city sank slowly, why the sudden destruction marks? If it collapsed instantly, why do some structures remain eerily upright, like the sphinxes sitting calmly in rows? That's why the leading theory today is a combination, a long decline punctuated by violent shocks. The ground was already sinking when earthquakes delivered the final blow. It's the only model that fits both the geology and the archaeology, but it still leaves gaps. Take the statues, for instance. When Egyptian divers recovered a batch in August 2025, including granite figures from the Ptolemaic era and a Roman nobleman carved in marble, they noticed something strange. Most were missing their heads, not eroded, not worn down, but snapped off in ways that looked deliberate. Now maybe that's just how they broke when they fell, but fracture specialists argue the patterns are too consistent, too clean, almost like someone toppled them intentionally. Which raises the question, could parts of the city have been destroyed on purpose before the sea swallowed it? We know ancient cities were sometimes ritually killed, statues decapitated, temples dismantled, symbols defaced. Was Canopus subjected to this before nature finished the job? Or are we just seeing nature's chaos masquerading as design? That's one of the paradoxes that makes this story so haunting. Artifacts themselves add fuel to the mystery. The naos of the decades, that granodiorite shrine etched with an astronomical calendar, raises huge questions. How were priests in the 4th century BC mapping the night sky so precisely that they could divide the year into 36 deacons, each tied to a 10-day period? The deacon system goes back to at least 2000 BC, but at Canopus, it appears carved in monumental stone. That suggests this city wasn't just a port. It was a center of astronomical and ritual knowledge. Then there's the Serapis head, carved in marble, standing nearly 60 centimeters tall. The cult of Serapis was supposedly created by Ptolemy I in Alexandria to unify Greeks and Egyptians. But the scale and quality of the Serapis statue in Canopus suggests this city may have been an early testing ground for the cult, a prototype before it spread across Egypt. If true, that would make Canopus one of the most important religious sites in the ancient world. And then, the real head-scratcher, the quartz sphinx of Ramesses II, recovered in 2025. Quartz is brutally hard to carve, harder than granite, harder than anything the Egyptians typically worked with. Bronze chisels, the standard tools of the time, should have worn down almost instantly. Yet the cartouche of Ramesses II is clearly visible on its surface. How was this done? The mainstream answer is abrasives, pounding with dolerite balls, grinding with sand and water. But skeptics point out that no quartz carving toolkits have ever been recovered from Canopus. Until one is found, the precision of that sphinx remains one of the city's strangest riddles. But perhaps the most puzzling mystery is not what we found, but what we didn't. Because despite all the physical evidence, docks, statues, temples, shrines, there isn't a single surviving classical account describing the collapse of Canopus. Strabo, Pliny, Juvenal all wrote about the city's decadence, its temples, its rituals. None wrote about its destruction. How is that possible? This was a literate, record-obsessed world. If a major city had been swallowed by the sea, wouldn't someone have mentioned it? The silence is deafening. Some historians argue that the collapse happened gradually enough that no one thought it was worth noting. Others suggest that the records existed but were lost, perhaps in the chaos of later centuries, when libraries burned and texts disappeared. Still others believe people simply confused Canopus's destruction with the decline of nearby cities like Thonis Heracleion, which also sank around the same time. But whatever the reason, the result is the same: a massive blank in the written record. And that absence feeds the legend that Canopus was more than just a city. It was a place deliberately erased, whether by nature, by gods, or by human hands. Now let's talk about scale. Abu Kirbe today covers 500 to 600 square kilometers. The ruins of Canopus stretch across a site nearly a kilometer long. That's not a small village. That's a city with docks long enough to handle fleets, warehouses for storage, aquaculture ponds, temples, and monumental statues. And remember, this was just one of several cities that sank in the same region. Thonis Heracleion, not far from Canopus, has yielded similar treasures: colossal statues, massive sanctuaries, shipwrecks, even the remains of a grand canal. Both cities vanished into the sea, rediscovered only by Frank Gaudio's teams in the late 20th century. When you step back, it looks less like an accident and more like a pattern. Which brings us to the theories. Theory 1. Gradual subsidence and sea level rise, supported by sediment cores, geological models, and centuries of slow sinking. The Nile Delta is soft, unstable land. It compacts, it warps, it sinks. Combine that with rising seas, and eventually the ground goes under. Solid science. But it doesn't explain the broken statues, the sudden collapses, or the eerie absence of written records. Theory 2. Sudden catastrophe. An earthquake or tsunami triggering soil liquefaction. Statues toppling, docks collapsing, neighborhoods swallowed overnight. The physical evidence, fractured statues, liquefaction zones in the sediment, supports this. But the lack of direct historical accounts leaves it incomplete. Theory 3. The combination. A slow, inevitable sinking punctuated by moments of disaster. This is the theory most experts now believe. It explains the gradual lowering of ground levels and the violent destruction marks. It fits the geological data and the archaeological record, but it still leaves one big hole: the silence in the historical texts. Which is why some fringe theories keep circling back. Whispers of divine punishment, echoes of Atlantis, myths of gods angry at human decadence. The scholars reject these, of course, but the gap they fill, the missing human testimony, is exactly what keeps the myth alive. What's undeniable is this: every few decades, Canopus reveals something new. It's as if the city is slowly surfacing in stages, each discovery peeling back another layer of the story. And that story is far from complete. Picture the scene today: divers descending through murky water, visibility less than a meter, sand swirling with every movement. Then, out of the haze, a wall appears, a perfectly cut limestone foundation stretching over 100 meters, or a statue face staring back, encrusted with coral, eyes empty but intact. These are not the ruins of a forgotten fishing town. These are the bones of a metropolis, a place that stood shoulder to shoulder with Alexandria, only to vanish completely. And the biggest question remains: why? Was it nature? Was it a disaster? Was it something more deliberate? A ritual killing of a city that had outlived its time? We don't know, and maybe that's the point, because the sunken city of Alexandria isn't just about history, it's about mystery. And mystery has a way of pulling us in deeper than any certainty ever could. By now you might be wondering, if the evidence is this compelling, why isn't Canopus as famous as the pyramids, or the lighthouse of Alexandria, or even Atlantis? The truth is, it was almost forgotten twice. First, when it sank beneath the waves. And second, when modern history chose to focus on grander monuments. a lighthouse that stood for 1,500 years, a pyramid that stood for 4,000. But Canopus? It was wiped off the map, buried under sand and silt, as if it had never existed. It took a stubborn underwater archaeologist, Frank Gaudio, to bring it back. He spent years convincing skeptics that this wasn't just a fisherman's tale. Armed with sonar, he and his team mapped the bay like detectives dusting for fingerprints. What they found was a city so well preserved that it felt less like a ruin and more like a crime scene. And that's when the scale of the mystery became clear. Let's talk artifacts again, because they are the voice of this city. Take the naos of the decades, carved in dark granodiorite, etched with a star calendar, and commissioned by Pharaoh Nectanebo I in the 4th century BC. Its presence at Canopus suggests that this wasn't just a trade hub, it was a spiritual center where priests were keeping time by the stars and guiding rituals that tied heaven to earth. Then the marble head of Serapis, almost 60 centimeters tall, once part of a cult statue 4 meters high, a god created to unify two cultures, sitting at the heart of Canopus. Imagine the power of that symbol. Egyptians and Greeks bowing together in one temple, under one roof, to a god that was both theirs and not theirs. And then the quartz sphinx with the cartouche of Ramesses II, pulled from the seabed in 2025. Quartz is so hard that even today it's a challenge to carve. And yet here it was, engraved with hieroglyphs so sharp they cut through millennia. Some experts shrug and say, abrasives. Others point out that no quartz carving tools have ever been found in Egypt. Until they are, this sphinx will remain one of the strangest objects in Egyptian archaeology. Put all this together, and Canopus stops looking like a provincial outpost. It looks like something bigger, a prototype of Alexandria itself, a place where trade, faith, and power converged before history decided to bury it. But then comes the question no one can avoid. What really killed it? Geologists argue for subsidence, the slow sinking of delta land into soft sediment, combined with a sea level rise of about 2 millimeters per year. Over 2,500 years, that adds up to 4 or 5 meters of drowning, enough to put Canopus underwater. Archaeologists argue for catastrophe, an earthquake, a tsunami, soil liquefaction. The broken statues, the toppled walls, the sudden destruction marks all point to something violent. The most convincing model is a combination. Centuries of slow drowning, interrupted by sudden shocks. A city living on borrowed time until one day the earth gave way. But here's the catch. Even that doesn't fully explain the silence. The Greeks wrote about everything. The Romans obsessed over records. The Byzantines chronicled disasters, eclipses, even strange omens. And yet, not a single surviving text describes the death of Canopus. It's as if the city didn't just sink, it was erased. Which leaves us with the anomalies. The uniform statue decapitations, too neat for random chaos. Were they toppled intentionally before the city fell? The quartz sphinx carving, too advanced for bronze tools. Did they know a method we've lost? The harbor dock, still aligned after 1,500 years underwater, too stable for delta soils. Did their engineers master foundations we can't yet prove? And the silence in the texts, too loud to ignore. Did someone deliberately forget this city, or was its end simply swallowed by the tides of history? Each one of these gaps is small on its own, but together they make Canopus feel less like a solved mystery and more like an open wound in the past. And maybe that's why it keeps resurfacing. Every few decades, another discovery. 1933, 1999, 2019, 2025. Each time, new artifacts. Each time, new questions. Almost like the city is teasing us, revealing itself piece by piece, daring us to put the puzzle together. But maybe we never will. Maybe Canopus wasn't meant to be explained, only remembered. Think about it. You're standing on the shore of Abu Qir Bay, waves lapping at the sand. Beneath you, not even 20 feet down, lies an entire world. Temples, shrines, docks, statues, faces carved in marble, staring into the murk. The remains of processions to Osiris, where priests once pulled sacred barges down ceremonial canals. A whole city, frozen in time, waiting for divers to shine their lights on it again. It's not a myth, it's not a legend, it's real, and yet, it feels just as haunting as Atlantis. So what do we take away from all this? That ancient Egypt was even more complex than we imagined. that entire cities could thrive, rise, and vanish, and leave barely a whisper in the record. That technology, faith, and engineering we thought we understood might still hide secrets under the sea. And most of all, that history is fragile. One earthquake, one flood, one shift in the ground, and an entire civilization can disappear. The sunken city of Alexandria is more than ruins. It's a reminder, a warning, that nothing, no matter how grand, is guaranteed to last. And yet, thanks to the divers, archaeologists, and scientists who keep uncovering it, Canopus lives again, piece by piece, statue by statue, mystery by mystery. So the next time you think of Egypt, don't just picture pyramids and mummies. Picture a city beneath the waves. Picture priests pulling Osiris through flooded canals. Picture a sphinx of quartz, carved with impossible precision, staring up at the surface through centuries of darkness. Because the sunken city of Alexandria may be gone, but its mysteries are far from over. Thanks for watching. If you want more forgotten discoveries and real mysteries from deep history, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, keep questioning everything.